You can stay standing if you like, but I wanted to thank you all for coming out this evening. We're going to get some more folks in. This is really great to see you all out here. My name is David Edmondson. I am the transportation planner for the city. I am the project lead on this, at least as far as our city goes. This effort is a really important part of re-envisioning and making concrete the how we improve East Street. Yes, asphaltedly. So before we get into sort of what exactly is being shown and what our thought process is, I wanted to point out a few things. First of all, feel free to have some snacks. Second of all, if you haven't gotten a feedback form from the back, they're on that chair that's facing the entrance. Fourth, we have a number of city staff here who are here to mingle and talk and answer sort of questions about this as well as other projects if you want to just talk. So we have Chirian Ipin, Nteko Wakasano, Tracy Coleman, Shraddha Praharaj, and I'm sorry, I forgot. Oh yes, and Bob. Bob Eric, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm terrible with names. But they are all here to be a part of this session as well. Jamie, maybe you could come over and give a few minutes to talk about what exactly we have and introduce your team.
All right. Evening. Jamie Kendrick, part of the consulting team to try and untangle this Northeast Street conflagration of uses. Hunter Withers and Devin Hahn. Devin used to be with the city many years ago. Maybe not that many years ago. So thanks for coming. Appreciate the turnout. I think part of the context here, as David kind of indicated, is the city has a long-term kind of complete streets plan and bicycle kind of master plan that is intended to provide high-quality, separated facilities for all users, bicyclists in this and pedestrians in this case. So that is, kind of a policy choice to some extent that has already been made at a broad scale, right? That we're going to have, equitable use of travel lanes or equitable use of the public right-of-way. And you can define that as either curb to curb or utility pole to utility pole, kind of however you'd like. So kind of at a big picture level. Now, it's easy to say, yep, going down to 2 travel lanes and bike lanes everywhere and here we go, right? It's not quite that simple because we've got to think about the equitable use of the space, and that does not mean that, bikes get every bit of space or cars get every, but you got to figure out how to make it work together, right? So that's what we have been working through. I think we have come to the conclusion at this point, and happy to answer questions as to why we think that is, but I think we've come to the conclusion that anything that is on the west side of Northeast Street, south side of East Street, I don't know. The west side of Northeast Street for bicyclists is a risk, primarily because of Dairy Maid interaction and some other things as you get a little bit further north, but it's really tight with where the utility poles are up against the buildings and the parking that's kind of semi-on street and semi-off street up near the antique shop. We've just kind of generally come to the conclusion that anything that is on the west side of East Street is risky for bikes and peds too, for some example. If you can move your bike facilities to the opposite side, to the east side of East Street, or the outbound side of East Street, then at least the trucks coming in and out of Dairy Maid have much better visibility as to what is coming in either direction, right? They can be pulling in and out and seeing, people going in front of them versus having to kind of sneak down, either side to see who's walking or biking right in front of them. So that's, I think, probably the primary reason that we are looking at a two-way, what we call cycle track on the east side of East Street. The other is to start to give some definition to the east side of East Street. So right now, more or less between 7th or 8th, maybe 7th and 4th, there really is no definition to that east side of the street. There's hardly any, I don't think any curb and gutter on the east side. It just cars that are in those businesses kind of park wherever they want. Sometimes they're right against the road, sometimes they're back by the building. Setting aside what it means from a kind of a streetscape perspective, just from a general user safety perspective, it's not the best condition. So what we are suggesting, at least is in the interim, and you can look at the pictures, there is a you can tell me the difference between internal option A and B, you get a prize. Because I've been working on this for 6 months, and I still have to re-engage. In the interim, the near term, is to create some type of a barrier. Could be using curb stops, or what we call quick curb, or pylons, or planters, or something to give some further definition to the east side, and to allow bikes to go both ways, but still allow cars to come in and out of those shops, preserve the business access there. There's no general right to have the entire frontage be, access for cars. So that's our thinking as to the placement of the bike lane. To the last thing is at the north end, starting at 8th Street all the way up to Market and beyond eventually, is the rail trail, rail width trail, excuse me, or used to be rail width trail, right?
Still is.
Well, now, anyway, the rail width trail is that same two-way facility north of 8th Street. And so, to have people come off of that and then have to separate to go, inbound and outbound, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of bicycle and pedestrian movements. So that's kind of the rationale for where we got to. We have some interim ideas, we have a long-term idea. Frankly, the long-term idea is a complicated and expensive proposition to build curb and gutter and storm drain and figure out, how there's some vaults underneath some buildings along there and right up against, and the utility poles, et cetera. So it's a long-term, higher cost option, which is why we have suggested to the city that there is some, quick build, if you will, alternative that can give some definition to the street, provide the safety for bicyclists and pedestrians. So that's where we are at this moment. I think it's probably best for Devin, myself, Hunter, others to be around and you just look at it and ask questions and put notes, and we'll go from there. And unless you have any other general questions. Sure.
The transition from what we see there to the rails to trails, are you literally going to come off this thing on the street onto the separate path, or is it just continue on the street?
So I think to some extent that is a final design question, right? How do we structure where the curb and gutter goes south of 8th Street, where the sidewalk goes? Is it a raised surface? I think we've got the concept here about how to make the movements work right, but whether it is truly one continuous or whether you have to kind of dive off the street a little bit is I would say a TBD. Yes, ma'am.
Can you show on the maps how South and Fourth what happens?
That's the next phase. Right, David?
Right. So I'll talk
Excuse
about
me
all
one
the
second.
other projects. East Street is subject to a ton of projects right now. So the redesign looked at the whole of the corridor. That finished up in 2022. Shortly after, we applied for this grant to design the north section, and we've just been awarded a grant to do a similar study for the southern section. What this does is it takes the sort of broad concepts and makes them into something that's more actionable and useful. That southern section should be done by June of next year.
This time next year we'll be having the same conversation.
Correct.
Can you define what the southern section covers?
That goes from Monocacy Boulevard to north to 4th Street. It'll look at, again, sidewalks, bikeways, the transit center, crossings, and other things that can make that area feel unpleasant to be on if you're not driving. We also, as was mentioned, we have East Street Rails with Trails, our phase 2. So Bob is the project lead on that. And that's currently undergoing its final design, and we are funded through actually and building the thing, which is great because that's been talked about since forever. As we move forward with this project, we're going to pursue funding for it to finalize a design and get it built. But right now, we need to have this study finished to firm it up. Your job this evening is to tell us what we missed. Nobody knows their neighborhood really better than the people that live there or that work there. And we miss things, and we want to plan with you and not just for you. And so let us know how we can improve, what you like, what you don't. It's what these sticky notes are for, and also it's what the forums are for. For the people who couldn't come online, there will be a survey that is identical, as well as these boards. So that way you can take a look at that and give your feedback that way. And that'll be ready by the end of tomorrow. So if there are no more general questions, then I think probably the best bet is to talk to each other and talk with us, and that way we can really get into it on things. Yeah.
I'm curious about the interim options where the pedestrians will walk.
Yeah, it's like, that's great.
I mean, there's people walking
Mhm.
that street every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the short answer is, I guess there's an option 1C, right? Where you could remove these kind of traffic, or these control devices here, put them here, and have that be the interim sidewalk. It's not, even to build sidewalk on the east side is a difficult proposition. So that's why a pure sidewalk on the east side is not interim.
Can you explain the particulars of why it makes it so difficult?
Grading, stormwater, property access,
Does the city have any, set like right away or?
it's complicated. I mean, the best way I can describe it is this road goes back 200 years, right? And so,
Don't we like?
as a general matter, if you were to look in land records, you really wouldn't see anything of significance. You might see something that says 30 feet from the center line, but it doesn't tell you where the center line is, right? Or it's a 60-foot, right of way, but it doesn't tell you where the 60-foot begins and ends. The best way to visualize it is kind of utility pole to utility pole.
I have the railroad, or I used to have the railroad maps you should have, and they show the 66-foot right away with the center line going like this
Yeah.
through the 66-foot right away.
Whether that holds today from a legal perspective is a whole another conversation. Who holds title to that still? Did things revert back to property owners? It's an incredibly, complex.
It should be state highway.
Should be, right? But I will tell you that we're doing one in southern Maryland right now where I've got a swath of road that goes off like this, or the right-of-way goes off like this while the road goes like this, and it was a revertible easement that never reverted. And now now that we're trying to put a trail there, the property owner's coming back and saying, well, wait a second, this was supposed to revert to us 35 years ago, right? So I agree that it may be clear as to what the right-of-way for the 66-foot right-of-way was for the railroad back then, but that was back then, and there've been so many, I don't even know who technically holds that easement today. So.
I just have one more question. You
Sure.
have the option, do you have a graphic that shows us with a bike lane on both sides?
We don't at this point, because of the Dairy Maid issue primarily and some other kind of operational challenges. At this point, we're showing just the single on both sides. Yes, sir.
If the temporary option is in place, and say hypothetically Dairy Maid wants a bigger space and moves, is there a long-term option still available?
Sure.
Oh yeah, we can do a lot of things. So for instance, if after discussing this, people say, no, we really want to do the sidewalks like now, and that budget comes through so we can actually afford it, then that would be what we do. In the interim option, we would incorporate all of the survey work and all of the useful work that's been done into that, and just jump straight to there. But because that is so expensive, we feel as though it's useful to have sort of that, like, the cheaper option in case, simply put, we don't have the funding for it. That way our options are open. But if Dairymaid leaves for some reason, and we hope they don't, but if they did, then yeah, we can always revisit. Nothing here is set in stone. All right, last question.
If and when the
Yeah.
property were ever redeveloped, then a new curb line would be set, and that makes all things possible.
Yep.
So just to be clear, for the interim options, you expect pedestrians to walk in the bike lane?
Adjacent to it.
Wait,
Basically where those little zebra dome things are,
We could.
That would-
We could take these out. I mean, theoretically, people could walk where they're walking today, which is, suboptimal, but, they still at least have some form of protection.
right.
So, yeah, none of these create a physical, dedicated pedestrian option on the east side.
Right. But the long-term option, as you can see, does have that. It's just, it'll take a little bit to get to that point from a funding standpoint. But if we can, then, if we are told to, then we most certainly will. It's not an issue of us thinking that that's a bad idea. It's more an issue of us thinking that's a really pricey idea, and what to prioritize is ultimately a political choice.
What is the
So-
difference between those two pictures?
Well, come on, who's getting the prize?
The planters versus the planters versus
It's
Yep.
just kind of setting the edge a little bit firmer, that's all.
Okay, last general question before we.
What does that mean, if you don't have the money, or it's a long term? And that's very vague. Are you talking about 5 years, are you talking about 10 years? Are you talking about possibly never?
We're,
I'm a pedestrian,
yeah.
so that's more important to me than a bike.
No, that makes sense. I think that the funding issue will determine how long term is. If we get the funding for it tomorrow, then it might be 2 years or so until we actually starting the design process to actually finishing, actually building it. It depends on how that money comes in, because there's red tape if it's a grant and all that. But otherwise, it's deliberately vague because there's so many factors that to give an estimate based on things that haven't happened and we don't know if they will happen I don't feel comfortable doing that, even sort of shooting in the dark.
So there's a possibility of just
There's a possibility that we may not get the funding soon, but we as a city are committed to complete streets and Vision Zero. We also have a fundamental idea that we need to be modal neutral. So walking and cycling and driving, these are all valid ways to get around. And our comprehensive plan says that we need to have a complete sidewalk network. This is the highest scoring area for missing sidewalks. We have about 30 miles of those. And this is probably the if not the highest scoring area by our metrics. So if there is funding for sidewalks generally, then odds are this is where it would go.
Where would the funding come from? It's like, is it in the city budget, or is it grants and are there proposals written to get that money? Where are we?
So so this could come straight out of the city budget, so tax dollars. This could come from a combination of that and grant funding. So right now, the state has something called the Transportation Alternatives Program grants, and we'll be applying for those monies. But they usually like to have an interim design ready when we apply, and the application deadline is before this project is over. So prior to this design being over, I'm gonna see what I can do to finagle that, but also with budget cuts at Maryland Department of Transportation, that gets a little bit sticky, and we may not even be able to get anything there. But there's also the Bikeways Grants program, which is also through state, and that has the same sorts of limits and deadlines and difficulties. But we'll be looking for funding anywhere that we can find it. All right. So I do want to give us enough time to view these and talk amongst ourselves. So if you have any other questions, you can come up and talk to me. Hope that's all good. All right. Cool. Thank you so much. We can wrap, and we'll be wrapping up at about in about half an hour. So thanks all.